May I first share a question from the floor? So the first question is about the vaccination. So from Professor Collins' slides, actually, majority have vaccination hesitancy, around 60% probably. So how can the vaccination hesitancy be improved? And especially among our healthcare workers, anything we can do to promote the vaccination hesitancy?
I think one side of it is the concerns about the risks of vaccination, which actually we can be very reassured about. We've been using the vaccines now in Hong Kong for 2 months, the Sinovac, hundreds of thousands of people have received the doses, and also BioNTech. And we also can look at experiences in other countries. And one thing that really resonates with me is the experience with the blood clots for the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, where those were picked up by post-licensing surveillance, by post-approval surveillance in different parts of the world. If there were issues with the BioNTech vaccine and also the Sinovac vaccine, I think we can imagine that they would have been picked up by the same kind of mechanisms. And I would say that particularly for the BioNTech vaccine, if there were any concerns about safety with any kind of outcomes, serious outcomes after vaccination, they would have been noticed by now, because if you look at the blood clots, which are very, very rare, they were picked up by the surveillance systems. So I think we can be very reassured about vaccine safety. And that's really important, an important message. But I know there's a lot of politics involved in choice of vaccines and other things, and that really doesn't help with people arguing about which vaccines are better or worse in terms of their side effect profiles. What we can say is that both vaccines have excellent safety profiles, excellent safety records. And we already know that based on hundreds of thousands of people who've had them in Hong Kong and millions overseas. Secondly, in terms of the benefits of vaccination, it's true, and I said in my talk, there don't seem to be a lot of immediate benefits to vaccination. We don't face a risk of COVID. Even people working in hospitals with COVID patients, there have been hardly any occupational infections because of the excellent infection control in Hong Kong. At the same time, there's been so few cases. Right now, there's hardly any cases in Hong Kong. So the risk of infection is very low, and there's not a lot of benefits. Today, there's an announcement of the Singapore travel bubble restricted to vaccinated people, but I don't think most people would consider that to be an incentive to get vaccinated. I don't think a lot of people are planning to take trips to Singapore in the short term. Maybe other places they would, but I don't think that's going to be enough of an incentive to change people's minds about the benefit of being vaccinated. So maybe the government has to come up with some other bigger benefits for people to get vaccinated, some incentives. And I fear that without that, the government may turn to mandatory vaccination, which will be extremely controversial, extremely divisive. But unless we have a high vaccine coverage, we can't go back to normal. And that's got enormous economic implications for Hong Kong.
Any comments from Grace?
Well, I think in terms of risk and safety, we do have a lot of scientific evidence, and I really doubt whether providing more of those would actually improve the vaccine uptake. So I perfectly agree that we actually should stress more on the benefits of taking vaccine. Of course, that would be related to government policies and policies with other countries as well. Personally, actually, I think after receiving the vaccine myself, I would say it actually improves my quality of life. Well, partly because I'm working in COVID was a lot, and in the past 1 year, there actually was some psychological burden with the fear of getting infected. But despite, as Ben has mentioned, the actual infection rate among healthcare workers were low. But I must say there was some fear among ourselves that we would get infected and passing the infection on to our families and close ones. So after the vaccination, I think that was actually very reassuring that I'm less concerned that I'm infected and passing the infection to others. So I hope that these positive messages would help to improve at least vaccine uptake among our peers and colleagues.
Yeah, so first-person experience of expert after feeling great after the vaccination will have positive influence to the healthcare workers, and also maybe may need to extend the travel bubble benefits to improve the incentive. Yeah. Another question is maybe, to both of you, Grace and also Professor Cowling. A question about anything emergency department doctor and nurses can improve our COVID-19 preparedness other than besides getting vaccinated ourselves and asking our patients to get vaccinated?
Well, I guess that's more directed to my talk. Well, I think as I've mentioned, I think for you working in emergency departments, you actually are the experts in dealing with emergencies. The problem with COVID, I think, is the duration that we have been experiencing. So I think you have so much experience in managing disasters, which very often have to be managed within hours or within a day or two. And for COVID, the main problem is the length of the pandemic that is lingering on, and we are really seeing no end to this. So we have heard about vaccine as a strategy, but elimination as well. But judging from the current situation in Hong Kong, it really seems that at least in the near future, we are not seeing an end to this pandemic. So I think that's why at the end of the talk, I'm talking about resilience. So it's really, we have to, on one hand, we're promoting vaccination, we're hoping for elimination. But on the other hand, I think we have to be prepared that we have to sort of remain status quo for maybe for months, end of this year, hopefully, if it will end by the end of the year. And we have to think about implementation of healthcare delivery in our own setting. For example, I've provided some examples in Department of Medicine or in HIV field, and in the emergency department, I don't know, maybe telemedicine might be something that you can think about, for example, for the follow-up cases that you see for those who you discharge from A&E directly, whom you would like to follow earlier. So telemedicine might be one of the options in the department. And so that might be something that each specialty could be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question from the floor. The question is about, we're focused on the healthcare aspect of COVID and its vaccination. And Ben mentioned the economic implications of not vaccinating in economic terms. Surely it will be cheaper to give a payment to Hong Kong residents who complete their COVID vaccination to encourage them to see the economic situation continuing to deteriorate in Hong Kong. So what's your opinion? Any comment on this?
Yeah, so I agree. In general, I'm not keen on the idea of paying people to get vaccinated, because I think they should really want to get vaccinated anyway. But given the economic cost to Hong Kong every month of the lack of travel, the reduction in trade, I'm sure you could add up how many billions of dollars are lost every single month, and then divide 1 month of that loss by the 7.5 million people in Hong Kong, and use that as a guideline for the amount to be paid for people to get vaccinated, so we can get back to normal. And I could imagine it could be a large amount of money per person that the government should be or could be willing to pay in order to incentivize people to get vaccinated. So I know they give a handout every year of something like $6,000 in recent years. I think it could be much more than that to incentivize people to get vaccinated. But I'm just a little bit uncomfortable at the concept of paying people to get vaccinated and setting a precedent for the long term that people would only do things if you pay them large amounts of money. So I don't know. I have a feeling that the government may go the other direction and just make it mandatory. and I don't want that to happen. But I have I have a feeling that may be what ultimately happens. Hong Kong may not be the first place to do that. It may be the second or third place in the world to do that. But I have a concern that that's maybe what will happen here.
Maybe so the current strategy of the Hong Kong government appears to use all the nudging measures, but that seems not pushing the vaccination rate high enough.
Yeah, I think it's running out of steam at about 10%. The vaccination campaign is running out of steam. The vaccine centers that I know about are really running at very, very low capacity. The one that I know best has space for 16 vaccinators all the time, 16 booths, and there's 2 in use. Yeah. And we should be going at full steam by now. It should be rolling ahead, vaccinating a lot of people every day. We've got the doses, we've got the capacity, everything's set up to go, and there's just not a lot of enthusiasm. And I don't know what would change that in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah. Any comments from Grace?
Well, I think actually in the last 1 week or two, there are reports in the news that several countries are thinking about mandatory vaccination, not for the whole population, but for selected populations, for example, including healthcare workers or university students. So, and many of those are actually in democratic countries, Western countries. So I think I won't be too surprised if this will happen in Hong Kong. Well, maybe for selected populations. So I don't really hope that this will happen because in the long run, that might not be a good idea, and that would be a lot of adverse impact on the population. I think at the moment, well, as I've mentioned in the talk, as healthcare workers, I think we ourselves should set a good example in getting vaccinated ourselves, and hoping that would also have a positive impact on our population as well.
Yeah, thank you. So probably we come to the last question from the floor. But the last question is about the choice of the vaccine. So according to Professor Collins' study carried out on the universal vaccination, and there is a substantial proportion of those who will never get vaccinated. Does it have implication on the choice of the vaccine, like BioNTech or Sinovac? Which one is better?
So I gave 2 possible strategies for mass vaccination. One of them is the idea of just vaccinating everybody with whichever vaccine's available. And the second strategy is herd immunity with a high coverage, particularly of BioNTech. And I've been a strong advocate for using as much BioNTech as we can. If we can use all 7.5 million doses, actually it could be 9 million if we use all of the liquid in the vials, like other parts of the world are doing. We're still not doing that as far as I know in Hong Kong. If we could use 9 million doses of BioNTech, then that would be pretty good. That would be getting us close to herd immunity, and then the remainder to be made up by people choosing Sinovac. And if there's 20% of people who don't want to get vaccinated, that's okay. 80% is still good enough for herd immunity. But I fear that because of the choice we have and a lot of people choosing Sinovac, we're going to end up the only possibility is the first one of getting everybody vaccinated and with whichever vaccine's available. And it's going to be difficult to persuade that 20% to get vaccinated when they said they're never going to get vaccinated. So then that's when mandatory vaccination comes in. I agree with Grace. I wouldn't like to see it happen, but I worry that may be the only solution, because without that, we'll be a lower vaccine coverage and stuck, unable to go back to normal because it's too dangerous for the healthcare system. So the government doesn't have to wrap everybody in cotton wool. We can be exposed to hazards in our daily lives. We can be exposed to COVID. It's not the government's job to keep numbers to 0. The problem is for the healthcare system, if we have a large epidemic, the healthcare system will collapse. And that's really bad news for everybody in Hong Kong. So that cannot be allowed to happen. And until we're safe from that, we have to have the measures in place that are currently in place. We have to have the status quo. And I think that's a problem economically for another 1 or 2 or 3 years. So yeah, that's basically where I'm coming from. Over.
Oh, thank you. So thank you so much, Professor Carlin and Professor Lui. So this will end our session here, and we will come back at 15:10. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.